Welcome to our deep dive, into this whole U.S.-China rivalry thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we're all on this global chessboard, right?
Yeah.
Watching these two powerhouses make their moves.
Right.
And today, we're going to unpack visual capitalist analysis of it,
Okay.
which was inspired by Ray Dalio's work, which breaks down this whole contest into 8 key power metrics.
Yeah, that's right.
And we're going beyond just comparing GDP figures here.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, we're talking about military strength, the cutting-edge world of tech,
Right.
even the influence of the almighty dollar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is where it gets interesting for anyone following global affairs because the scores are surprisingly close.
Yeah, the U.S. edges out China 0.89 to 0.80. But this is a tight race.
Yeah.
Not a blowout.
And that scoring system, actually, it's based on what are called Z-scores.
Okay.
It helps us see just how much each country is ahead or behind on each of those power metrics.
Right.
So it's not just some arbitrary ranking. It gives us a more statistically grounded comparison.
Okay, so let's unpack some of these metrics.
Okay.
Some areas like tech and innovation seem incredibly close.
Right.
The U.S. scores a 1.9, China 1.8.
Yeah.
Practically neck and neck.
Exactly. And while we all know the U.S. is home to those,
Yeah.
Familiar tech giants,
Right.
China's rapid development in areas like AI and semiconductors raises a fascinating question.
Okay.
Are we seeing the beginnings of a power shift in the tech world?
Interesting.
What does that mean for future innovation, for investments, for the global economy as a whole?
Those are some big questions.
Yeah.
And it's not just tech that's close.
Right.
Economic output is another nail biter.
Yeah.
I know China's GDP is still significantly smaller, but I've been hearing a lot about predictions that they could overtake the U.S. soon.
Yeah. Dalio's analysis suggests that if China maintains a 5% annual growth rate,
it could indeed surpass the U.S. by 2035.
Well.
However, even his own projections indicate a potential slowdown to around 4% annual growth in the next decade.
And let's not forget those challenges within China.
Right.
The property sector woes.
Yeah.
Weakening consumer demand. Maintaining that growth won't be a walk in the park.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But there are significant internal hurdles for China to overcome.
Right.
But the possibility of them taking the lead economically is real and something to watch closely.
Okay, so we've got 2 areas where it's practically a tie.
Right.
Where does the U.S. seem to have a clear upper hand?
When it comes to being the world's financial center, the U.S. absolutely dominates.
Okay.
A score of 2.7
Wow.
versus China's 0.2.
That's a huge gap.
That's a massive gap.
What's driving that huge difference?
It speaks to the global trust in U.S. markets, the stability of the dollar, and the sheer volume of financial activity flowing through Wall Street.
Right.
It's a testament to the dollar's long-standing role as the world's reserve currency, which we'll delve into later.
I'm struck by how the narrative around military power seems to be shifting.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on whether the U.S. truly holds the advantage?
Okay.
And how should I, as someone interested in global affairs, be thinking about this?
It's the traditional view that the U.S. is far ahead, outspending China on defense by a factor of 2 to 1.
Right.
But that's only part of the story.
Okay.
China's been aggressively modernizing its military, and some argue they're already more powerful.
Interesting.
In certain areas like hypersonic missiles and naval capabilities.
The gap is closing.
Precisely, and it's not just about spending.
Okay.
China is strategically building alliances with Russia, Iran, North Korea, creating a more complex geopolitical landscape that directly challenges U.S. dominance.
It's like watching a high-stakes game of chess unfold.
It is.
This begs the question.
Yeah.
What about the Global Firepower Index?
Right.
Which ranks nations' military strength. Does it support this notion of a shrinking gap?
Yes. Even the Global Firepower Index, which takes into account a wide range of factors like manpower, equipment, and resources, has observed China closing the distance with the U.S.
That's definitely food for thought.
It is.
But let's not forget, China has its own areas of dominance.
Right.
One that really stands out is trade.
Absolutely. China has become the top trading partner for a staggering 120 countries worldwide.
Wow.
They've built this vast network of economic influence that can't be ignored.
Right.
The U.S. still scores well.
Yeah.
But there's no denying China's leadership in global trade.
It really highlights how the global landscape is shifting.
Yeah.
Now, one area that surprised me was competitiveness.
Okay.
China has a solid score of 1.0, while the U.S. actually scores negative.
Wow.
Negative point.
A negative score.
Yeah, a negative score. That's pretty alarming.
Yeah, that negative score reflects factors like infrastructure quality,
Right.
ease of doing business, regulatory efficiency, and even societal unity.
Wow.
It suggests the U.S. might be facing internal hurdles that hinder its ability to compete on the global stage.
So it was more than just economic and military power.
Right.
It's about having a system that's operating efficiently and effectively.
Yeah.
It definitely raises some red flags. Before we move on, I want to circle back to education.
Okay.
We briefly touched on it, but how do these two countries compare in this crucial area?
It's a nuanced picture.
Okay.
Both have their strengths and weaknesses. The U.S. has many of the world's top universities.
Right.
But its high school system has faced challenges in recent years.
Yes. Declining test scores and funding disparities between schools have been major concerns.
Exactly. China, on the other hand, has invested heavily in higher education, boasting over 100 elite universities. But access to quality education in China is often determined by socioeconomic factors, with rural and lower-income students facing significant disadvantages.
So it raises this fundamental question.
Yeah.
Is it better to have a few stellar institutions at the top or a more equitable system that provides a solid education for everyone?
Yeah. It is a complex issue with no easy answers.
Right.
The U.S. system often emphasizes critical thinking, creativity, and individual expression.
Right.
While the Chinese system often prioritizes rote learning discipline and national unity, it will be interesting to see how these different approaches shape the future workforce and innovation landscape of each country.
That's fascinating. It's almost like we're witnessing two different philosophies of education clashing.
Yeah, it is.
And speaking of clashes, let's talk about the elephant in the room. The almighty dollar.
Right.
I know it's important,
Right.
but I've never fully grasped what it means for the U.S. to have the world's reserve currency.
This is where the U.S. has a truly unique advantage. A reserve currency is a currency held by central banks worldwide and used for international transactions.
Okay.
For decades, that's been the U.S. dollar.
Right.
Think about it. Most oil and other commodities are priced in dollars.
Wow.
Even if the U.S. isn't involved in the transaction at all.
That's wild.
This gives the U.S. incredible financial power,
Right.
allowing it to borrow money at lower interest rates and exert significant influence over global trade and finance.
It's like a superpower in itself.
Yeah.
But is this dominance under threat?
Wow.
I know China has been actively promoting its own currency, the yuan.
You're right. China has been working to internationalize the yuan, establishing currency swap agreements with other countries, and pushing for its inclusion in the International Monetary Fund's basket of reserve currencies.
Gotcha.
While the dollar remains dominant for now, China's efforts, coupled with its growing economic might, could eventually erode the dollar's supremacy.
It's almost like a slow-motion tug-of-war with the U.S. and China vying for control of the global financial system.
It is.
This has major implications for the balance of power, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The potential shift in reserve currency status is one of the most significant developments to watch in the coming years.
Right.
It could fundamentally reshape the global economic landscape and have far-reaching geopolitical consequences.
Well, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part.
Yeah.
From the 8 pillars of power to the underlying trends shaping this rivalry.
Right.
But I feel like we've only just begun to unravel this tangled web of geopolitical intrigue.
It is a very complex situation. Lots of moving pieces.
Yeah. Let's take a moment to reflect on what we've discussed so far, and then we'll dive even deeper in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive into the U.S.-China superpower showdown.
As we've seen, the financial aspect of this rivalry is incredibly high stakes, with the potential to reshape the global economic landscape.
Right.
But this competition goes far beyond just dollars and cents.
Oh, absolutely.
It feels like there's a deeper clash of ideas and values at play here.
Precisely. The U.S. champions democracy-free markets and individual liberty, while China promotes a more authoritarian model with a greater degree of state control.
Okay.
This fundamental ideological difference adds another layer of complexity to the relationship.
So it's not simply a competition for resources and influence.
Right.
It's also a clash of worldviews.
It is.
This raises an important question for all of us trying to make sense of this global power struggle.
Yeah.
What does it all mean?
Well,
Should we be worried, excited?
Right.
What's the key takeaway here?
The key takeaway, I believe, is that we are living in a period of profound transition.
Okay.
The old world order with the U.S. as the sole superpower is fading.
Mm-hmm.
A new, more multipolar world is emerging with both opportunities and challenges.
It's like the tectonic plates of global power are shifting beneath our feet.
Yeah, you could say that.
What are the potential implications of this shift?
On the one hand, a multipolar world could lead to greater cooperation and balance.
Okay.
No single nation would be able to dictate the terms of engagement.
That sounds positive.
Right.
Less chance of one country throwing its weight around.
It could be, but on the other hand,
a
multipolar world could also be more unstable and unpredictable.
Right.
Increased competition between different powers could lead to conflict as they jostle for influence.
So it's not a simple win or lose scenario.
Right.
It's more like navigating a complex and ever-changing maze.
Exactly. That's why it's crucial to stay informed and understand the nuances of this rivalry.
Okay.
It's not about choosing sides or cheering for one team over the other.
Gotcha.
It's about recognizing the complexities of the situation and being prepared for the challenges and opportunities ahead.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important point for our listeners to grasp.
It is.
Now, we've discussed those 8 pillars of power.
Right.
But I'm curious to explore some of the underlying trends shaping this rivalry.
Okay.
One that immediately comes to mind is the increasing interconnectedness of the global economy.
That's a key trend for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks to globalization, the U.S. and China are deeply intertwined.
Okay.
Their supply chains, financial markets, and trade flows are linked in countless ways.
Right.
What happens in one economy inevitably impacts the other.
It reminds me of that old saying, when China sneezes, the world catches a cold.
Exactly. This interconnectedness creates both opportunities and vulnerabilities.
Okay.
It fosters economic growth and efficiency.
Right.
But it also means that economic shocks in one country can rapidly ripple across the globe.
So, like it or not, we're all in this together.
We are.
What other trends should we be paying attention to?
The rise of technology is another critical trend, especially in fields like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and biotechnology.
Yeah, those are huge.
These technologies have the potential to disrupt industries, reshape societies, and shift the balance of power.
It's almost like the future is being written in code, and both the U.S. and China are racing to be the authors of that code.
That's a great analogy. This technological race has implications not just for economic competitiveness, but also for military dominance and global influence.
Speaking of military dominance, I've been reading a lot about China's growing assertiveness, especially in the South China Sea, and their efforts to expand their military presence around the world.
Yeah.
It's definitely causing some anxiety in Washington.
Yes. China's military modernization and expansion have raised concerns in the U.S. And among its allies in the region. It's become a major flashpoint in the U.S.-China rivalry.
So are we headed toward a direct military confrontation between these two superpowers?
It's a question that keeps policymakers and analysts up at night.
Yeah, I bet.
While nobody wants a war,
Right.
the risk of miscalculation or unintended escalation is always present.
Okay.
Especially in areas of heightened tension like the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait.
It's a sobering thought. It feels like we're watching a high-stakes game of chicken.
Yeah.
With both sides hoping the other will blink first.
Well, a rather unsettling analogy.
Yeah.
It underscores the importance of diplomacy communication and a clear understanding of each other's red lines to prevent a potentially catastrophic conflict.
With all this competition and rivalry, is there any room for cooperation between the U.S. and China?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
While the rivalry is real and intense, there are areas where cooperation is both possible and essential.
Like what?
Climate change, for example, is a global challenge that demands a coordinated global response.
You're right. It's hard to imagine solving climate change without the U.S. and China working together.
I agree.
What other areas might we see collaboration?
Global health security is another critical area where collaboration is essential.
Okay.
The COVID-19 pandemic showed us just how interconnected we all are.
Yeah, for sure.
When it comes to infectious diseases.
Right.
Combating pandemics and other global health threats requires international cooperation, including between the U.S. and China.
So even amidst their rivalry, they have to acknowledge that they're sharing the same planet.
Right.
And face common challenges that transcend national borders.
Exactly. It's in both their interests to find ways to cooperate on these existential threats.
Right.
Finding common ground on these issues could pave the way for greater cooperation in other areas.
It's reassuring to hear that it's not all doom and gloom. There are glimmers of hope for collaboration, even amidst this intense competition.
Absolutely. It's a complex and multifaceted relationship with elements of rivalry, competition, and cooperation.
Right.
And it's likely to remain that way for the foreseeable future.
Okay, we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
Yeah, we have.
From the 8 pillars of power to the underlying trends shaping this rivalry. But before we wrap up, I want to get your perspective on something that's been on my mind.
I'm all ears.
The analysis we've discussed focuses primarily on quantifiable factors.
Right.
Like GDP, military spending, and innovation. But what about the role of soft power?
Okay.
Things like cultural influence, global perceptions, and the appeal of a country's values and way of life.
You've hit on a crucial point.
Okay.
Soft power, or the ability to influence others through attraction rather than coercion, is often overlooked in these discussions.
I agree.
But it can be incredibly potent.
It's fascinating to think about. Take the global popularity of American music, movies, and fashion. That's a form of soft power, right?
Absolutely. And China has been investing heavily in its own soft power initiatives.
Oh, wow.
Promoting its culture and language around the world.
Interesting.
And trying to shape global narratives through its state-controlled media.
So it's not just a battle for hard power. It's a battle for hearts and minds.
It is.
Winning over the world with your culture, your values, your way of life.
Precisely. And in the long run, the country that can most effectively wield both hard and soft power will likely have a significant advantage in shaping the future global order.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive.
It has been.
But it feels like we've only scratched the surface of this complex topic.
I agree. The U.S.-China rivalry is a multifaceted and ever-evolving story, with new chapters being written every day.
Right.
It's a story that will continue to shape the 21st century and beyond.
Well, I, for one, am completely hooked on this geopolitical thriller.
I understand.
And I can't wait to see what the next chapter holds.
Right.
What are some of the key things we should be watching for in the coming years?
That's a great question. One scenario is a continuation of the current trajectory, with the U.S. and China locked in a competitive but mostly peaceful rivalry, marked by economic interdependence, technological competition.
And occasional flare-ups of tension in hotspots like the South China Sea.
Right.
This scenario assumes that both sides will act rationally and avoid actions that could lead to a direct military conflict.
Right.
It also assumes that the U.S. will be able to maintain its technological edge and adapt to China's growing economic and military might.
So a kind of frenemy relationship where they cooperate on some issues while competing fiercely on others.
You could say that.
But what if those assumptions don't hold true?
Well, then.
What are some alternative scenarios we should consider?
Another possibility is a more confrontational relationship. With increased military tensions, economic decoupling, and a hardening of ideological divides. This scenario could be triggered by a miscalculation in a regional conflict, a cyber attack, or a major economic crisis.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It could be.
Would that mean a new Cold War, similar to the one between the U.S. and the Soviet Union?
Some analysts believe so, however.
It's important to remember that the current rivalry is different from the Cold War in several key ways.
Oh, so?
The U.S. and China are far more economically intertwined than the U.S. and the Soviet Union ever were.
Right.
And the ideological divide, while real, is not as stark as it was during the Cold War.
So a new Cold War might be a misleading analogy.
It might be.
Are there any other potential scenarios we should be aware of?
Yes. There's also the possibility of a more cooperative relationship emerging.
Interesting.
Driven by shared interests in addressing global challenges like climate change, pandemics, and nuclear proliferation.
Okay, that sounds like the most optimistic scenario.
It is.
But is it realistic given the current level of mistrust and competition?
It might seem unlikely now, but international relations are not static.
Okay.
Circumstances can change, leaders can change, and new opportunities for cooperation can arise.
So you're saying?
It's important to keep an open mind and not rule out any possibilities.
That's a good point. We can't predict the future, but we can certainly try to be prepared for different eventualities.
We can.
So what can individuals do to navigate this complex and uncertain landscape?
First and foremost, stay informed.
Okay.
Read widely, listen to different perspectives, and try to understand the complexities of the issues at stake.
Don't just rely on sound bites and social media feeds, right?
Exactly. Dig deeper, challenge your own assumptions, and be wary of simplistic narratives and easy answers.
Right.
This is a complex topic that requires careful consideration and nuanced thinking.
So in essence, be a critical thinker.
Precisely, and don't be afraid to engage in civil discourse and debate with people who hold different views.
No.
We can learn a lot from each other, even when we disagree.
It's a great reminder. It's easy to get caught up in the rhetoric and demonize the other side.
It is.
But that's rarely productive.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, we all share this planet.
Right.
And we all have a stake in finding solutions to the challenges we face, including the challenges posed by the U.S.-China rivalry.
Well said. This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive.
It has.
I feel like I have a much better understanding of the stakes involved in this rivalry and the potential scenarios it could play out in the coming years.
And remember, this is an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
It's important to stay engaged, keep learning, and adapt our thinking as the situation evolves.
Okay, we've covered a vast amount of information in this second part.
We have.
From exploring potential scenarios to understanding the importance of individual engagement in this global power struggle.
Yeah.
But before we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder.
I'm all ears.
We've talked about hard power, soft power, economic might, military strength. But what about the role of values?
Okay.
Could a country's commitment to democracy, freedom, and human rights ultimately be the decisive factor in this global power struggle?
That's a profound question and one that deserves further exploration.
It certainly does, and perhaps that's a deep dive for another day.
Indeed. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this fascinating journey into the heart of the U.S.-China superpower showdown.
Yes, thank you.
We hope this deep dive has provided you with valuable insights and food for thought.
I hope so.
And remember, the future is not predetermined.
That's right.
The choices we make today, both individually and collectively, will shape the course of events in the years to come.
They will.
So let's choose wisely. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into this whole U.S. versus China superpower showdown.
Yeah.
We've explored those 8 pillars of power. Uncovered some of the hidden dynamics at play, and even pondered the role of soft power.
It's a big topic.
It feels like we've unearthed a treasure trove of insights.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
But where does all of this leave us? What should we as individuals interested in global affairs be taking away from this deep dive?
You've hit on a key point. Knowledge is power. Especially in a world as complex and interconnected as ours, understanding these trends, these power dynamics, allows you to make more informed decisions. Whether as an investor, a business leader, or simply a citizen trying to navigate an ever-changing world.
Okay, that makes sense. But I have to confess, all this talk about potential conflict, economic decoupling, it can feel a bit overwhelming.
I understand.
Is there any reason for optimism?
There's always reason for optimism. Remember, history isn't a straight line. It's full of twists and turns, unexpected shifts. Moments where seemingly intractable problems find solutions.
I like that perspective. So, if we're thinking big picture, what are some potential positive outcomes we could see emerging from this rivalry?
One possibility is a sort of competitive coexistence, where the U.S. and China continue to compete vigorously in areas like technology and economics, but also find ways to cooperate on shared global challenges.
So imagine them working together on climate change, global health security, even issues like nuclear nonproliferation.
Exactly. That kind of cooperation could not only benefit both countries, but also contribute to a more stable and prosperous world.
Now, that's a vision I can get behind.
Yeah.
But to be honest, sometimes it feels like we're trapped in this zero-sum mentality.
I understand that.
Where one country's gain is automatically the other's loss.
It's easy to get caught up in that kind of thinking, especially when you're bombarded with news headlines and political rhetoric that often frame the relationship in those terms.
So what can we do to shift away from that zero-sum mindset,
Well,
both on a personal level and in terms of broader societal discourse?
one important step is to recognize and challenge those simplistic narratives.
Okay.
Seek out diverse perspectives,
Ah.
engage in thoughtful discussions with people who hold different views,
Right.
and try to understand the nuances of the issues at play.
It's about moving beyond those easy labels, the us versus them mentality that can so easily shut down dialogue and prevent us from finding common ground.
Absolutely. And remember, focusing on areas of shared interest, like climate change, can help foster a more collaborative spirit.
Right.
Highlighting those areas where cooperation is not only possible, but essential for the well-being of both countries and the world as a whole.
That's a powerful message.
And it brings me back to something we discussed earlier.
Okay.
The role of values.
Right.
You mentioned that a country's commitment to democracy, freedom, human rights could ultimately be a decisive factor in this global power struggle.
Yeah, can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Yes, it's a fascinating idea to consider.
Okay.
In the long run, a country's appeal, its influence, might not just stem from its economic or military might,
Right.
but also from the values it embodies, the kind of society it creates.
So if a country is seen as a champion of those values,
Right.
a beacon of hope, that could translate into a different kind of power.
Yes.
A more enduring form of influence.
Exactly. It's a form of soft power
Right.
that can be just as potent, if not more so, than hard power.
Interesting.
It's about inspiring others,
Right.
winning hearts and minds, not just through economic incentives or military coercion, but through the power of example, the attractiveness of your values.
Wow, that's a truly profound thought.
And it leaves me feeling a bit more hopeful about the future.
Me too.
Remember, the future is not preordained.
Good.
The choices we make, the actions we take will shape the course of events.
Right.
And that's true on both an individual and a collective level.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a call to actions.
Okay.
Stay informed, engage in thoughtful dialogue, and don't underestimate the power of your own voice, your own actions in shaping the future.
Well said. This U.S.-China rivalry is a story that's still being written.
And we all have a role to play in shaping its outcome.
We do.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We hope it's left you with a deeper understanding of this complex and vital issue.
I hope so.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep engaging.
That's right.
Until next time, stay curious.